The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed through the hall. "If she fixes it, I'll eat my degree." CEO Richard Sterling stood before 200 people throwing a wrench at the feet of a woman in a white shirt and faded jeans. The room was packed with MIT engineers, tech journalists, and live streaming cameras. Everyone burst into laughter. Clara Reynolds. No degree, no reputation, no one knew who she was. On stage sat the R7000 engine, worth $2 million, that had left a team of elite engineers stumped for 3 days. Sterling spoke through clenched teeth. "You have 30 minutes. Fix it, and I'll admit I was wrong. Fail, and you leave this place for good." Laughter erupted. Lights flickered. But Clara said nothing. She bent down, picked up the wrench with a hand once mangled in an explosion, and began. Clara Reynolds lived in a small apartment on McGraw Street, East Detroit, where train horns blended with cold winds slipping through old window panes and streetlights cast long shadows over cluttered bookshelves. Every morning, at exactly 5 a.m., she brewed black coffee in a chipped ceramic mug and sat quietly by the window. Her brown eyes gazed out at the factory that had shut down back in the 80s. She worked at the public library, stacking books, helping kids with homework, reading fairy tales to the blind. No one knew anything about her past. No one asked. Neighbors called her kind Miss Clara, always in a white blouse, hair neatly tied back. No makeup, no rings, no talk of her youth. Mrs. Davis, an elderly neighbor, once whispered, "She's kind truly." But there's something sad about her, like she's carrying a heavy shadow on her shoulders, and no one knew she was once hailed by NASA as a genius. No one understood why a nearly 40-year-old woman with no standout credentials would apply for a job at Sterling Aerospace, the most prestigious aerospace company in Michigan. She didn't apply as a lead engineer, a supervisor, or even a consultant. Just a low-level technician, a position usually meant for fresh graduates. Her resume was brief. Education self-taught, mostly. Hands-on, experience repaired cars at small garages around Detroit. Certifications, none. During the interview, HR manager Mark Jordan frowned and asked, "No degree, no documents to prove your qualifications." Clara simply smiled, eyes steady and unblinking. There are things you can't measure with a diploma. Like passion. They thought she was just a dreamer, but they hadn't seen those hands touch an engine yet. Sterling's technical testing room was designed to filter out dreamers, as they often called applicants without a reputation. Inside, a small turbine engine sat in the center of the room like a beast stripped bare. Its electronics regulators and valve blocks all arranged with precision to mislead and confuse. Clara walked in, bringing nothing but bare hands and eyes that followed every sound. It took her only 4 minutes to hear a subtle knock from the combustion chamber. She gently tapped the compression latch the way someone might soothe a heartbeat gone astray. Then she picked up a pen and listed every configuration flaw, 6 in total, 2 of them the engineering team had never even discovered. She completed the test in 14 minutes, half the allotted time. And just like that, for the first time, the name Clara Reynolds began to be whispered in Sterling's hallways. Monday meetings on the 14th floor, Sterling's executive hall, were usually brief, until the name Clara Reynolds appeared in the technical review report. "Who is she, Richard?" Sterling growled. The chief engineer handed over the report, voice hesitant. No degree, but identified complex faults using just sound and engine feel. Sterling flipped through the pages in silence. His icy eyes gleamed with something no one dared name discomfort. "She can't be better than my MIT engineers. Impossible." He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket. Schedule a public test. With press, with cameras, with the whole team. Then smirked ever so slightly. "So everyone can see. Passion doesn't fix aerospace engines." What he didn't know, what Clara carried, wasn't just passion. It was a truth he wasn't ready to face. 3 days later, an email arrived in Clara's inbox. No subject line, just one sentence. Care to show your skills? Friday, main hall, 10 a.m. She knew instantly this wasn't an opportunity. It was a trap. The Sterling Auditorium was staged like a product launch. Cameras, reporters, engineers lined up in the front row, MIT wristbands gleaming. At the center stood the R7000, the massive jet engine that had brought the entire team to its knees. Richard Sterling walked onto the stage, voice booming through the microphone. No degree, no reputation. But today, Ms. Reynolds will attempt to fix an engine our MIT team couldn't crack after 72 hours. The crowd burst into laughter. A young engineer muttered under his breath, "Maybe she's good with cars." But this is aerospace, not a parking lot. What they didn't know, that engine was something she had designed herself 5 years ago. Clara stepped onto the stage. No applause. Overhead lights reflected off the polished metal surface of the RS7000 engine. Nearly 200 people, engineers, investors, journalists, held their breath, waiting to laugh. A young engineer pointed at her right hand, the one damaged in an explosion. "Look, she's shaking. Bet the last time she saw a real engine was on YouTube." Laughter rippled through the room like waves. Sterling crossed his arms, standing behind the mic, his voice sharp. 30 minutes. If she can fix it. I'll eat my college degree. Clara didn't flinch. She placed her hand on the engine's casing, feeling its subtle pulses, her gaze distant. In her mind, there was no laughter, only echoes of her days at NASA. And Daniel's hand covering hers, not to guide, but to take what was never his. She wasn't here to win. She was here to prove that truth exists even when buried. Clara crouched low, pressing her ear against the engine's body, an old habit that once earned her ridicule at NASA. But this time the sound wasn't just data. It was memory. The vibration frequency was off. Compression ratio wrong. Air ducts misaligned. It was all too familiar. She stepped back. Her eyes widened. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was Orion. Not a random imitation, but her original design. The one stolen 5 years ago. But someone had copied it like a blind man mimicking a Van Gogh, without understanding, without finesse, and dangerously wrong. If the RS7000 flew at standard altitude, it would explode within minutes. She wasn't just facing mockery. She was staring down a betrayal from her past, a ghost reborn as a killing machine. Clara stood still. Her right hand clenched so tight it turned white. She could stop. She could bow her head, accept defeat, and return to the library where kids still waited to hear her stories about space. No one knew the RS7000 was stolen. No one knew it was her design. But if she stayed silent, that machine would fly, and it would kill. She looked up. Faces smirking, MIT rings shining, recording microphones capturing every moment. She thought of Daniel, the man who once held her hand at the workbench, only to use that same hand to trigger a false alarm that cost her everything. She thought of her friends at NASA, the only ones who ever called her a genius, now convinced she was a traitor. Clara took a deep breath. She had no choice left. Expose everything, or carry the shame of cowardice forever. 25 minutes remained. Everyone expected her to bow out and retreat. But Clara turned to Richard Sterling, her voice low and firm. "I need a Matuo digital regulator and a Fluke standard pressure calibrator. Immediately." The entire hall fell silent. No laughter. One engineer muttered, "How does she even know she needs exactly those 2 devices?" Clara gave them no time to guess. Her right hand still trembling slightly, but her movements decisive. She disassembled the pressure regulation system in under 30 seconds. Misaligned position. Resonance frequency out of phase. She pointed to a tiny dent. If this flies at standard altitude, that dent will become a resonance point and cause an explosion. No one spoke. Sterling opened his mouth to argue, but Clara cut him off. "Either you let me finish the repair, or you take this engine up and kill people." For the first time, no one in the room was arrogant enough to laugh. Sterling's voice echoed across the hall, gleeful and smug. I don't suppose you need instructions on which end is up." Laughter erupted again. Phones were raised. Tech bloggers scribbled notes. Everyone was ready to watch her fail. But Clara didn't hear any of it. Her hand, damaged by years of silence and a single explosion, moved gently across the engine's cold surface. Not searching blindly, but remembering. NASA nights, chalkboard equations, hands stained with grease and wonder. Sarah scoffed from the side. "Need help finding the engine cover? Or should we call a real engineer?" Clara's eyes didn't flinch, because what she saw wasn't just poor calibration. It was theft. The design wasn't similar to hers. It was hers, twisted, misused, and dangerously unstable. And now the question wasn't, can she fix it? It was, will she let this corrupted version of her dream go airborne? Clara didn't answer the question, "Who are you?" Instead, she turned eyes locked on the control panel, her fingers tapping commands with the precision of a maestro conducting an orchestra. The compression ratio needs to be corrected to exactly 14.7. 1. If it stays at 15.2 like it is now, the combustion chamber will resonate at 6.3 kHz structural failure in just 4 minutes at 40,000 feet. The entire room held its breath. She continued unblinking turbine speed, 97,300 RPM. Fuel injection time 23.7 microseconds. Bypass ratio 5.1. 1. A front-row MIT engineer leaned over and whispered, "These specs. There's no way to know them unless you've touched the original design." Sarah Chen gripped her pen tighter. James Morrison glanced at Sterling, his lips trembling. Dear God. She's not fixing the engine. She designed it. Clara still said nothing, because from the moment she walked into that room she didn't need them to believe her. She only needed them to look. No one was laughing anymore. No one even dared to blink. Clara stood in the middle of the exposed engine, her scarred hands gently touching each connection point as if they were the very spine of her own body. She shook her head slightly, almost whispering, "The vibration frequency is off by 0.3 kHz. The back pressure return pipe is misaligned. Whoever worked on this doesn't understand how materials expand under stratospheric temperatures." Sarah Chen exhaled sharply. "How do you know all that in such detail?" Clara looked her straight in the eye, not with anger, not with pride, just pure unwavering truth. "Because I designed the original model, Orion engine, NASA. 2019. A silence fell over the room as if the oxygen had been sucked out. Pens stopped writing, cameras went still. Clara hadn't walked into that room just to fix the engine. She walked in to reclaim her name. "Back then, NASA called me the woman who would take us to Mars." Clara spoke with a steady voice like reciting the verdict of an old trial. "I was the lead propulsion systems engineer for the Orion project. 5 years ago." James Morrison stammered, "No, it can't be." "Clara Reynolds, but your name isn't on NASA's engineer roster." Clara nodded slowly, "Because I was erased, betrayed. My name was stripped from every technical document, every patent, every meeting." Her gaze darkened as she uttered the name Daniel Walsh. "My fiancé, my colleague, the man who stole my design and sold it to Lockheed for $50 million. A female reporter in the back row dropped her pen as if her hand had touched a truth too hot to hold. "And now the flawed replica of that design is lying right here in front of you. The night before our wedding, I went back to the lab and found Daniel copying the entire Orion database." Clara's eyes drifted as if she were still standing in Houston that night. "I asked him what he was doing. He smiled. No shame at all. $50 million. Lockheed wants the entire tech, and they want me, not you." She clenched her right hand, the one marked with thick, pale scars. "I tried to stop him. Daniel triggered a false alarm and accused me of stealing the data. In the chaos, he disabled the lab's safety system to cover his tracks. The explosion came right after." The auditorium fell silent as Clara rolled up her sleeve. Charred, jagged scars ran from her wrist to her elbow. I didn't just lose my job. I lost the hand I used to touch my dreams, and no one stood by me, because I was a woman, and I had no paperwork left to prove a thing. Clara pulled her sleeve back down slowly, as if closing a chapter that had once been her entire life. I didn't sue Daniel. I didn't sue Lockheed. I didn't sue anyone. Sterling frowned. Why not? You could have reclaimed everything, your name, your fortune. Clara looked at him, her gaze no longer cold but calm like still deep water. Because I knew if I walked into court with this hand with a tainted reputation, no one would believe me. She pointed to the RS-7000, the block of metal lying silently in the center of the hall. I didn't come for justice. I came because this engine will kill people if it flies. The room fell into a chilling silence. Someone copied Orion, but they didn't understand high-altitude harmonic structure. This is a bomb with wings, and I can't let it take off, even if it means I have to disappear again. No one asked. No one interfered. Clara bent down and opened the pressure regulator panel. A nearby engineer blurted out, "Careful, that section's extremely sensitive." But Clara's hands were already moving fast, precise, as if every wire, every bolt had been etched into her muscle memory since 5 years ago. She adjusted the oscillation filter, swapped out the sensor core with a manually modified version. Response delay must be reduced to 0.3 microseconds. Otherwise, high-frequency waveforms will resonate and detonate 6 minutes into flight. Morrison froze. Sarah Chen took a step back. No one dared mention credentials anymore. Clara stood up, wiping her hands with an old cloth. Let's run it again. This time, let the machine speak for itself. And in the room, once filled with doubt, for the first time only the sound of heartbeats remained, and a silent, wordless awe. Clara gave a slight nod. A trembling engineer initiated the diagnostic sequence. The sound emerged low, steady, precise, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Every eye turned to the digital readout. One by one, the indicator lights switched to green. Pressure stable. Resonant frequency matched the ideal design. Compression ratio, 14.7. 1. Vibrations perfectly neutralized. A young engineer whispered, "It's perfect. Almost too beautiful to be real." Morrison leaned back in his chair, whispering like he'd just witnessed something forbidden. She didn't fix it. She brought it back to life. Clara said nothing. She simply stood there, watching the engine sing the melody she once wrote in blood, in tears, and through sleepless nights at NASA. In that moment, she was no longer the forgotten woman. She was the creator of something that defied an entire industry's doubt. Sterling stood frozen at center stage. His eyes moved from the instrument panel to the stunned engineers around him, then settled on the woman in the white shirt, scarred hands still standing silently beside the engine she had just resurrected. He asked, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Who are you?" Clara turned unclipped her simple hairpin, revealing a faint scar trailing down her neck. She spoke each word with clarity. "I'm the one who warned NASA about this resonance flaw. 5 years ago. I'm the one who wrote the first control lines for Orion. I'm the one Daniel betrayed, erased from the records, and replaced by names that looked better on paper." From her pocket, she pulled out a small object, an old NASA pin, its back engraved with the words Ad Astra per Aspera, to the stars through adversity. And from that moment on, no one in that hall ever dared call Clara unqualified again. Clara stepped towards the central control console. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her eyes no longer held fear. She typed a few commands. The large LED screen behind her lit up the core source code of the RS-7000 engine's operating system. The engineers murmured. Sterling instinctively took half a step back. Clara pointed to a specific comment line, /EM, NASA, Orion, 2019. Phase Sync Subroutine. Designed by E. Mitchell. Confidential backup key embedded. No one said a word. A second later, more lines appeared, all carrying the EM NASA tag scattered throughout the original codebase. Every design I've ever written contains a hidden identifier to protect against unauthorized replication." She raised her phone. Displayed on the screen was a legal document signed by a top D.C. law firm, Cease and Desist. Sterling Aerospace. Evidence of copyright infringement. Estimated damages $500 million USD. But it wasn't the number that silenced the entire auditorium. It was the next sentence Clara was about to say. Sterling collapsed into his chair, cold sweat beating down his temple. The engineers stood frozen like statues. Journalists hovered with trembling hands over their keyboards. Clara looked at them not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the calm of someone who had already weathered the storm. "I could sue. I could tear this company apart. And maybe I'd win." She held up the cease and desist order and tore it in half. "But I didn't come here for fame, or for money. I came because this design, if installed and flown, will kill people." She lowered her voice, locking eyes with Sterling. "I won't repeat my old mistake, staying silent when I see danger. This time I make it right." And in that moment, Clara didn't just reclaim her name. She reclaimed something far more valuable, the trust of a room that once set out to destroy her. James Morrison was the first to break the silence. He removed his MIT ring, gripped it tightly in his fist, then looked up at Clara. "I've taught engineering for 20 years, but today I learned the most important lesson from the woman I once called not qualified enough." Sarah Chen swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry. We were wrong about you." A young engineer, one who had once mocked Clara's trembling hands, lowered his head. I didn't know. If I hurt you, I'm sorry." Clara didn't respond. She simply gave a small nod. Sterling slowly rose to his feet like a man who'd just weathered a storm. "We need you, here." At Sterling, but Clara, her gaze soft like the sky. After Thunder said one quiet sentence that silenced the entire room. "What you need isn't me. It's a culture that knows how to listen." Sterling stepped toward Clara, and in his eyes was no longer the gaze of a CEO, but of a man seeing his true reflection for the first time in years. "What title do you want, Chief Engineer Senior Advisor? We can offer whatever salary you name." Clara simply shook her head. "I don't need a chair. I don't need my title back." She looked around the auditorium, then asked, "How many women are engineers on your team? How many people not from the Ivy League made it to your final round of interviews?" No one answered. Clara pointed to the engine still running smoothly now, humming like an apology. "That thing doesn't care about gender. It doesn't see skin color. It doesn't ask for diplomas. It only needs someone who truly understands it. And so do I. I only need the next generation to never be stripped of their right to believe in themselves." Clara picked up her worn canvas bag, inside only a notebook, a pen, and a faded NASA pin. She stepped off the stage, the worn soles of her sneakers tapping softly against the auditorium floor. No one stopped her. No one spoke. All 200 people, engineers, executives, journalists, stood frozen like statues. Sarah Chen whispered, "We tried to destroy a legend, and never even knew it." An older journalist scribbled into his notebook, "Today I witnessed the loudest silence in the history of American engineering." At the door, Clara turned back for one last look at the room. "If any of you have ever felt like you weren't good enough, like you didn't fit the mold, remember this ability doesn't live on a diploma. It lives in your hands and your heart." Then she walked out, leaving behind a room full of people that had never felt so small. On Monday morning, just like always, Clara arrived at the neighborhood library before 7 a.m. No one knew she had just saved an entire industry from a ticking time bomb of engineering failure. Her white shirt had been washed clean. The NASA pin still rested in her pocket, not for display, but as a quiet reminder. "Miss Clara, tell us the story about the Mars rocket again today." An 8-year-old girl grabbed Clara's hand, eyes sparkling like mirrors of wonder. Clara smiled and pulled a book about the solar system off the shelf. Today, I'm going to teach you how to build a jet engine, using a plastic bottle and a rubber band. The kids burst into cheers and applause. No newspaper mentioned Clara. No interviews, no Hall of Fame, but in that small room filled with old books and new dreams a woman once called a genius was quietly planting hope again in the very place where belief had once been extinguished. The room grew heavier by the minute. The mocking laughter had vanished, replaced by wary stares because everyone was beginning to realize Clara wasn't ordinary. Richard Sterling frowned, leaned toward James Morrison and whispered, "She knows too much. Run her file again. I want to be sure she's not some kind of corporate spy." Clara heard every word, but she said nothing. Her hands moved across each component as if listening to a language only she could understand. Sarah Chen stepped forward, lowering her voice. "If you don't stop right now, we have the authority to remove you for unauthorized access to classified designs." Clara met her gaze firm and unwavering. "This doesn't belong to you. This is a stolen copy of a dream one that nearly killed someone." And right then, a young engineer spoke up. "If she's telling the truth, then we're standing next to a bomb that's already ticking." The air in the room felt frozen. A security officer began approaching. Sarah hesitated, then raised her hand to signal pause, her eyes conflicted. Clara didn't move. Not a single step back. "I don't need anyone to believe me. I just need you all to look." She pulled from her pocket a thin piece of metal, the original airflow conduit from the early Orion prototype. Compare the material. Compare the resonant frequency. Compare the gas response lag. I designed this to fly beyond Earth's orbit, this copy. It wouldn't survive a flight over Denver. James Morrison, the man who had once mocked her, stepped forward. He took the metal from her hand. His expression shifted from doubt to horror as he held it up against the current blueprint. Dear God, she's right. Richard Sterling clenched his fist, jaw tightening. If she's right, then Sterling Aerospace collapses. Clara's reply was soft but unmistakably clear. No, only the things built on arrogance collapse. The truth never does. The entire auditorium held its breath. No more scoffing, no more echoing security boots. Only the faint clinks of metal, the sound of someone who once helped build humanity's path to Mars, now repairing the very thing that nearly destroyed that dream. Clara removed her jacket, revealing an arm lined with scars. Her hand trembled not from fear, but from nerve damage. Yet, every movement was precise like a CNC machine programmed by pain and memory. She disassembled the auxiliary combustion chamber, adjusted the airflow conduits, fine-tuned the regulator valves. You don't have to believe me. Just watch the numbers after calibration. If the combustion temperature drops by 12% and pressure stabilizes at 11.3 bar, then I'm right. The monitor flickered, then flashed temp, 12.1%, pressure, 11.29 bar. The room fell utterly silent. There were no more excuses to hide behind. Because when truth performs better than deception, degrees and titles suddenly become terrifyingly quiet. Clara stood tall, wiping her hands with an old burlap cloth, then stepped toward the central control console. You want proof, not words. Code, signatures, circuit designs. This system is a modified version of the Orion Project original schematics, NASA 2019. She entered a command sequence. The massive screen lit up with the original blueprint files, each technical note marked with the tag EM NASA 2019, repeated again and again in the code comments. James Morrison stepped back, his face pale. Sarah Chen whispered almost like a confession. This can't be fake. Only the original designer would know those calibration values. Clara turned to them not with anger, but with a clarity and sorrow that cut deeper. I wrote those lines of code, and the man who erased my name was Daniel Walsh. The room went silent, not out of shock that someone had lied, but because they all knew they had chosen to trust credentials instead of the truth. Clara typed in the final command on the console. A message flashed on the screen. Engine test mode. Ready. She glanced around the room, not seeking permission, just a space wide enough for the truth to be heard. If I'm wrong, it'll shake Miss Rhythm and the temperature will spike beyond safe limits. But if I'm right, you're about to hear something no one in this room ever has a design done right. She pressed enter. For a moment, nothing. A silence thick, like the air before a storm. Then, the engine roared to life, smooth, steady, perfectly rounded, a sound so precise it sent chills down the spine. The data streamed across the screen. Temp 942 degrees C. Stable. Pressure 1130. Bar. Resonance. Match 99.97%. James whispered as if confessing a sin. No fake engineer could replicate that sound. Sarah turned her face away, eyes brimming. Richard Sterling simply let go of the table like a man who had just heard his verdict read. Clara said nothing more. Because the engine had spoken for her in a language only the one who gave it life could have ever taught it to speak. Clara stepped closer to the control console. She opened the secondary screen, scrolling through the design's metadata. Zooming in on each code comment, EM NASA 2019. She typed a few more commands. A video file appeared, footage of Daniel Walsh in the NASA lab 5 years ago, copying data from an internal camera he thought had been deleted. I keep the original, on a hard drive never connected to any network. She turned to face Richard Sterling. The one who gave this design to Lockheed Martin was Daniel Walsh, the one who bought it, Sterling Aerospace. Not by accident, but because you wanted to believe that someone like me could never have created it. Richard's face went pale, lips pressed tight. I didn't know. Clara's voice softened without bitterness. Not knowing doesn't excuse you. Not wanting to know, that's what's truly frightening. And in that statement there was no accusation, only a mirror reflecting all the prejudices this room had lived by. Clara placed her phone on the conference table. The screen lit up copyright lawsuit Sterling Aerospace versus Clara Reynolds. Claim $500 million USD. Richard Sterling stammered, "You had this prepared all along." Clara nodded. "I never forgot. I was just waiting to see if anyone dared to remember." She scanned the room where every gaze now hung low. "I could take this lawsuit nationwide, bring down your entire corporation, but then what kids out there would still be rejected for not coming from the right schools, the right families, the right classes." She pressed and held, then deleted the entire lawsuit. Everyone was stunned. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to ask, do you want to fix the engine or fix the way you see someone like me?" And in that moment, recognition came not from a courtroom but from the silence as everyone confronted what they had long refused to learn. Humility. Clara turned off the control panel, slipped her phone into the worn canvas bag. No one dared stop her. No one said, "Thank you," nor did anyone say, "I'm sorry." She walked slowly toward the exit. Each step seemed to peel away the layers of prejudice they had draped over her. "I don't need an apology. I just need... Next time someone like me walks through that door, you don't laugh." Richard Sterling stood frozen like a statue, his eyes vacant. James Morrison lowered his head. Sarah Chen cried quietly as if she had just missed the most important lesson of her career. Clara opened the door. The afternoon light of Detroit poured in, bathing the room in gold. She paused for a moment, then spoke without looking back. "I don't need anyone to fix my mistakes anymore. I need you to stop making them with the next person." And then she left. No applause, only silence. Heavy as judgment from every conscience in that room. The door had barely closed behind Clara when a trembling hand gripped a chair and a man rose to his feet. It was Samuel Green, 72 years old, a veteran aviation journalist who had been present at the Orion engine unveiling in 2019. His voice hoarse, he said, "I know her." 5 years ago, I wrote the article, Clara Reynolds, The Heart of the Journey to Mars. I saw her present the aerodynamic resonance theory myself, the very theory you doubted today, as a fake. Everyone turned to look. You don't need to check her resume. Just reopen NASA's archives. He pulled an old newspaper clipping from his pocket folded into quarters, the name faded with time, but one line still clear. Clara Reynolds, NASA Chief Propulsion Engineer. And so, at last, someone spoke up. Because sometimes all truth needs is one person to remember it right to bring it back to life. The next morning, a 47-second clip appeared on TikTok. The simple title read, "The Unqualified Woman Who Fixed a $1 Million Engine and Silenced the Entire Auditorium." No effects, no background music. Just footage of Clara standing in the room, her hand trembling from nerve damage, yet still adjusting every parameter as the engine rumbled perfectly. The clip was recorded by a young engineer, the very MIT kid who once mocked her. Now he wrote, "I used to believe in degrees. Now I believe in the truth. And yesterday I met the truth named Clara Reynolds." 48 hours later, 12 million views. Who is Clara trending #1 on Twitter? U.S. NASA officially reviewing the 2019 records, Sterling Aerospace statement, "We are investigating the entire technology supply chain." She no longer had to shout to be heard, because for the first time in 5 years, the world began listening to itself. On social media, thousands of engineers, STEM students, and especially women who had been underestimated, began sharing their own stories. I was cut from the interview because my voice was too soft. I did 80% of the project, but when presenting, my male boss told me, "Just stand there and smile." I studied engineering, but my ex said, "That's not a field for girls." A 17-year-old girl in Texas, once denied an aviation scholarship, posted a photo of herself building a model engine from recycled plastic. Caption, "Thank you, Clara. I won't stop anymore." NASA reopened its mentorship program for high school girls. MIT announced a new scholarship fund named the Clara Initiative. And so, through one quiet act, Clara ignited a greater engine than any fueled by combustion belief in one's own ability. Clara declined invitations from everywhere: NASA, MIT, commercial airlines, even an honorary position at the United Nations. She said, "Only one thing: I once fell from the top. The place I want to return to is where I was never judged." On Monday morning, she returned to the public library in East Detroit, still carrying her old canvas bag, still wearing a simple white shirt, and still sipping diluted coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. A 9-year-old girl approached holding a steam engine puzzle. "Miss Clara, I don't understand why it won't spin." Clara smiled and knelt beside her. "Then let's take it apart, find what's wrong, and fix it, like a real engineer, okay?" And so, without a name tag, without a title, Clara continued to teach the world this truth: an engineer is not who you say you are, but what you quietly fix every day. At a public high school in Indiana, during science class, the teacher asked, "Who inspires you to become engineers?" No one said Elon Musk. No one said Jeff Bezos. A brown-skinned boy stood up scratching his head. "I think it's Miss Clara. She made a plane engine that didn't explode and no one died. And no one had to cry from being humiliated. The whole class laughed. But it was a smile filled with admiration." At the library, there was a new book about Clara, the one who didn't need to win, only to be right. Not a bestseller like a novel, but placed firmly in the leadership and humanity section. Clara didn't know, and she didn't need to. Because once what is right is planted in someone's heart, it doesn't need to be famous, it just needs to last long enough to become a new standard anyone can reach. At a public high school in Indiana during science class, the teacher asked, "Who inspires you to become engineers?" No one said Elon Musk. No one said Jeff Bezos. A brown-skinned boy stood up scratching his head. I think. It's Miss Clara. She made a plane engine that didn't explode and no one died, and no one had to cry from being humiliated. The whole class laughed, but it was a smile filled with admiration. At the library, there was a new book about Clara, the one who didn't need to win, only to be right. Not a bestseller like a novel, but placed firmly in the leadership and humanity section. Clara didn't know, and she didn't need to. Because once what is right is planted in someone's heart, it doesn't need to be famous, it just needs to last long enough to become a new standard anyone can reach. Clara didn't win. She didn't return to NASA. She didn't reclaim her title. She just fixed one engine. Then she left. And in that journey, she didn't just restore a machine, she awakened an entire system asleep in prejudice. She didn't shout to the world how great she was. She let the engine speak for her, and the silence that followed rang louder than any speech. Clara isn't a superhero. She's proof that you don't need anyone to believe you right away. You just need to never stop believing in what's right. What about you if you were sidelined because of lack of reputation credentials or gender? Would you walk away or quietly fix every bolt so that when the time is right you fire it up and let it speak for itself? If this story touched you, please share it. Because maybe there's another Clara out there waiting for you to believe in her before the whole world does.